Okay, can we start?
Yes, sir.
So you can give a heading, related terms. Related terms. So first one, in that you can write inflation. We have already defined this, inflation. So just write one sentence there. It is a persistent increase in price level. Persistent increase in price level. Persistent increase in price level. Second one, disinflation. Disinflation. So right there, it is a reduction in the rate of inflation. It is a reduction. It is a rate of. It is a reduction in the rate of inflation. So for example, before it was 10%, inflation was 10%. Now it is 4%. In both cases, inflation is there, but there is a reduction in inflation. Deflation is different. Deflation is negative inflation. Here there is a reduction in inflation. Okay. So you write one sentence there. There again, it is a situation in which. It is a situation in which price level reduces. Price level reduces without any adverse impact on. Without any adverse impact on national income, output, employment, etc. So basically what is actually happening? High inflation was there, now that is reduced. Still inflation is there, but inflation is moderate. Now is this considered desirable? Is this considered desirable? Yes, this is considered desirable. Disinflation is actually considered desirable, that you can understand from what I've told you. It is actually reduction in price level, but at the same time not having adverse impact on national income, etc. Okay, so which also enable RBI to cut the interest rates. See, at this stage when this rate was there, RBI will increase the interest rates, right? Repo, reverse repo, bank rate, MSF, all this we have discussed, SLR, CRR, all the reserve requirements, all the interest rates, RBI will increase. But now, since this happened, RBI can decrease the interest rates. So that is an advantage. It will promote investment. It will further boost the growth. So it is actually considered desirable. Third one, you can write deflation. Deflation. This is negative inflation. So you can write there persistent decrease in price level. You remember yesterday when we talked about base effect, I have given you a case of negative inflation. Last year 90, this year last year 100 rupee for onion, this year 90 rupee. That is a case of deflation. But that is a statistical error. Actually there was inflation, and that's what we have understood as base effect. But deflation is actually, negative inflation. So you can write there persistent decrease in price level. Persistent decrease in price level. Persistent decrease in price level. That is negative inflation. So these two are opposites. Inflation and deflation are opposites. Okay, so disinflation means just a reduction in the rate of inflation, like 10% inflation, 4% inflation, you can see a reduction. This situation is what disinflation. Inflation and deflation are exactly opposite. One is persistent increase in price level, the other is persistent decrease in price level. Okay, and is this desirable, deflation?
No, sir.
No, that is not desirable, because that will lead to recession. That will lead to decrease in demand, that will lead to decrease in production, that will lead to recession. Okay, so this is not desirable. Deflation is not desirable. What is desirable? Disinflation. Or in other words, if you see, a moderate level of inflation is desirable. If you remember, I have told you the example of marker pen producing company, and I have told you what is actually going to happen with the moderate level of inflation. That is actually considered desirable, and it is good. Okay. So you can write along with deflation, you can write one more line. It is a situation in which price level reduces price level reduces along with fall in national income, comma, output, employment, etc. It leads to recession.
Sir, sorry sir, there was some connection problem. Can you just repeat sir, please?
Yeah, it is a situation in which price level reduces along with fall in national income. Whatever you have written before, exactly opposite.
Yes, sir, got it.
Okay, it leads to recession. Now next point, fourth one, reflation. So you can write there, it is a situation in which price level increases. So price is increasing, that means inflation is there, price level increases along with increase in output, that means growth is also there, GDP is also increasing along with output, employment, national income means output, okay, so along with output and national income, etc. When an economy recovers from recession. So this is a situation when economy recovering from recession. So that is what reflation. So price will increase, growth will increase, the output, national income, employment opportunities all will also increase. So this is a situation when economy is recovering from recession. So you can write there, when an economy recovers from recession. So these four terms are clear, no? So these four are actually connected. So inflation, persistent increase in price level; deflation, persistent decrease in price level; disinflation means again connected to inflation, but there is a decrease in rate of inflation. For example, first case it is 10%, second case it is 4%. This is disinflation. Reflation, again there is an inflation, plus other things are also increasing like production, that means national income, etc. Price is increasing, but at the same time national income, employment, etc. increasing. There is a situation where economy is actually recovering from the recession. Okay, now we can write few other sets. So these four are connected. Next you write stagflation. So next set, stagflation. So what is this? This stag means stagnation, flation means inflation. So it is actually a situation of inflation plus recession. Inflation plus recession. Recession means all this unemployment, everything will be coming here, okay? So inflation plus recession. You can write one line there. It is a situation in which high inflation is accompanied with high inflation is accompanied by recession. High inflation is accompanied by recession. In bracket you can write unemployment. So do you know any relation between inflation and unemployment before from yesterday's discussion? Phillips curve. So can we connect this to Phillips curve?
No, this is violating the Phillips curve.
This is actually violating the Phillips curve. So if you remember yesterday when we discussed about Phillips curve, I have told you that theory has been proved wrong later in the modern economic concept. So Phillips curve is actually true for short term. So this is a situation, during the situation of stagflation, Phillips curve won't exist. Okay, so you can, so what you have written there? Okay, see normally if you see 3 to 4% unemployment rate, it is considered as natural rate of unemployment. Now we have already discussed about usual status employment, okay, so subsidiary status, principal status, all those current weekly status, current daily status, all those unemployment measures we have done. Now when we talk about developed countries, because recession Mostly we are talking about developed countries. Okay, so when we talk about developed countries, 3 to 4% is natural rate of unemployment. Beyond that, if it is going beyond that, then we can say it is a situation of recession. Okay, so it can be caused due to cost push inflation. Okay, like in 1973 there was an oil shock, so that led to stagflation in many countries, even in India also. So next set you can write Phillips curve. Phillips curve. So stagflation means inflation plus recession. I'm talking about developed countries mainly. So this is a natural rate of unemployment. Beyond that, if it is going, that is recession. At the same time, inflation is there, then it is understood as stagflation. So Phillips, this was actually asked as a question before previous prelims. Now Phillips curve. See, if you talk about this too, Phillips curve is also establishing a relation between, what was that relation we have seen? Something like this, right? So what was on the x-axis? Unemployment, right? Unemployment and inflation. So what was that relation that we established? When inflation is there, unemployment is actually less. You can see here, this is less when inflation is there, but inflation is coming down, unemployment is more. But here, see, the relation that you can see is, this is actually a hypothesis. When we talk about Phillips curve, this is a hypothesis, but stagflation is an actual situation. So this is an actual situation. So during the time of stagflation, this Phillips curve won't exist. So this is theoretical concept, and it may be true for a short term. Okay. So there was a debate in 1970s during that time. So especially after this one which I've told you, this oil shock. So the changing theories, and Phillips curve does not exist now, as it failed to explain that situation. Why this high rate of unemployment is there even during high inflation. So Phillips curve does not exist now, but just for the sake of explaining that concept, I have explained at that time. Yesterday we have discussed just for that purpose. Okay. So stagflation and Phillips curve. One more under this category which you can write is misery index. So third one you can write misery index. It is a summation of inflation rate and unemployment rate. Just write, it is a summation of inflation rate and unemployment rate. So inflation rate plus unemployment rate. So let's say inflation is 5%, unemployment is, let's say, 6%. What is the misery index? 11%. So what is the connection between these three, what we have discussed now? The stagflation, Phillips curve and misery index. What is the connection? Is there any connection? Are you able to hear me?
Sir, stagflation and misery index trying to stagflation rate and misery index.
No, I am asking what is the connection? What is common in all these? See, what is the problem here?
Inflation and unemployment.
Yeah, here you can see inflation, unemployment. Here also inflation, unemployment. In misery index also we are talking about what? Inflation and unemployment. So that is why I have made it as a different set. 1, 2, 3. This is connecting the inflation and unemployment. So if you see the second one, that is Phillips curve, it is a hypothesis, right? I have told you. So Phillips curve is actually a hypothesis. The first one is actually a situation, actual situation, but connected to inflation and unemployment. So connected to inflation and unemployment, there is a hypothesis, that is what Phillips curve. The actual situation, that is stagflation. Third one is actually an index which goes for measurement. So these three you can actually understand together. Both are connected with inflation and unemployment. So misery index is calculated where, in which countries? Developed countries or in developing countries?
Developing.
Developing countries, so many other miseries are there. It is in developed countries. Okay, generally it is in developed countries. Inflation and unemployment rate. So this one. So what does it mean? If a misery index is increasing, what does that shows? Value of misery index is increasing. What does that shows? It shows a situation of stagflation, right? Or I can say during stagflation, misery index will increase. What is actually happening in stagflation? Inflation will be there and unemployment will be there. Both are increasing. Both increasing means index will increase. So this is how the interpretation, this is how the question will be asked. So the situation of stagflation indicate higher misery index, or higher the misery index indicate higher the stagflation, or there is a stagflation. Are you able to connect it or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So next one. So another set we can go. So first 4 set we have done. We have talked about inflation. We have talked about opposite, that is deflation. Then reflation when recovering from recession. And then we have also discussed about disinflation. That's the first 4 set direct. Then we have talked about stagflation, Phillips curve and misery index connected to inflation and unemployment. Now we will go for the next set. In that first one, inflationary gap. Inflationary gap. You write one line there. It is a situation in which aggregate demand is more than productive capacity of an economy. Productive capacity of an economy. Productive capacity of an economy means you can say aggregate supply, the total aggregate supply. So total aggregate supply means at the full employment level, what is the supply? If you want in bracket, you can write aggregate supply at full employment level. So what I am saying is aggregate demand AD is more than aggregate supply, okay, at full employment level. Full employment level. So demand is more than the productive capacity. Productive capacity means at full employment level. So more, AD more than, so for example, if 130 crore worth demand is there and 100 crore is actually the production. So what is the inflationary gap here? This gap. Okay. So you can see here demand is more. Demand is more means if there is a gap, this gap is there means supply is less, demand is more. So the price will increase or decrease? Increase. So inflationary gap means there is a inflation, right? Or the price will increase. So if there is a gap, then the price will increase. Simple. Next, you write deflationary gap. Deflationary gap. So how will you write this? Aggregate demand less than aggregate supply at full employment level. This also you can write here at full employment level. So let's say 80 crore is the demand, and that means demand is very less, supply is more than 100 crore, or let's say 100 crore. So what will happen in this situation? Price will be more or less?
Yes, sir.
Price will reduce, right? So price will come down. Price will come down means what will happen with production? What will happen with production?
It will reduce.
Production will reduce because firms don't get profit and the profitability is coming down. So that lead to ultimately deflation, or that lead to recession. Prices coming down means that is deflation, and I've told you deflation lead to recession. So deflationary gap, deflation, and that lead to recession. So this is good. Demand is more, it is actually good to an extent because that lead to increase in production. But demand is not there. This is actually a big problem. This is actually a big problem. Which country face this problem? Developing or developed?
Developed, sir.
Developing country, there is no deficiency of demand. Developed countries only have deficiency of demand. Developing country, anyway, anytime demand is there. There is, if the government is doing something to promote demand, then that will lead to hyperinflation. In developing countries, demand is already so high. Okay. Next point you write suppressed or repressed inflation. Third one, suppressed or slash repressed inflation. You write there one line. It is a situation in which aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. Aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. But government prevents. So if demand is more than supply, what will happen? Price will increase or decrease?
Increase.
Price will increase. But what the government will do is government prevent this increase. You write there comma, but the government prevents price level from rising. The government prevents price level from rising through direct price control measures. Through direct price control measures like ceiling prices. So government fixes ceiling for the essential items, etc. Okay. So beyond a limit, it cannot go. Now, fourth one you can write under this category, open inflation. Open inflation. It is a situation in which price level increases. It is a situation in which price level increases without any price suppressive measures by the government. Without any price suppressive measures by the government, or it is a persistent increase in price level. It is a persistent increase in price level. So it is a situation in which price level increases without any price suppressive measures by the government. So in the third one we are talking about suppressive measures, but here there is no suppressive measures by the government. That means it is a persistent increase in price level. So is it similar to this one that we have discussed first? Inflation, this one, first one. There also we have discussed the persistent increase in price. Here also we are saying the same. So actually both are same. This is similar to that first definition. Okay, now let me ask you one thing. When I'm talking about inflation suppressing or repressing and controlling inflation, both are same or different? This and this. Both are same or different? When I'm saying inflation suppressing or suppressed inflation and inflation controlling, inflation control measures, are they same?
Maybe different.
No, sir.
So when we talk about suppressed inflation, we are talking about the direct measure from the government, that fixing ceiling, etc. But inflation control means what you're doing, you are going to deal with demand and supply, right? So either you will increase supply or you will decrease demand. So this is not direct, you will deal with money supply. So to decrease demand, what you will do with money supply? You will decrease money supply. When money supply decreases, purchasing power decrease, so aggregate demand will decrease. So how to reduce money supply? For that you have monetary policy tools, right? You will go for contractionary monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy like CRR, SLR, repo, reverse repo, all those will increase. And similarly, contractionary fiscal policy, that we have anyway done. This part we have completed. And supply side measures also we have discussed. Okay, so here the difference when we talk about suppressed inflation, that is direct, and here it is controlled. That is different. Both are different. Don't be confused. Next one, you write structural or bottleneck inflation. Structural or bottleneck inflation. Okay, write one line there. It is caused due to structural deficiencies of an economy. Structural deficiencies of an economy, like scarcity of capital, infrastructural bottlenecks, market infrastructure, etc. See, this is what you mean by structural inflation. The problem, see here, the issues that we talked about, like there are infrastructural bottlenecks, market infrastructure in terms of like electricity, no electricity, etc. So that the cost of production will go, so that lead to inflation. Okay, so it is all about lack of infrastructure mainly. Next one, you write skewflation. Skewflation. It refers to a situation of very uneven increase in price level. It refers to a situation of very uneven increase in price level. So skewflation, uneven increase in price level. Okay, next is agriflation. So it is related to agricultural commodities, so you can write there increase in price of agricultural commodities. Increase in price of agricultural commodities, or if you want bracket you can also write food inflation. Okay, and regarding food inflation we have discussed already, and we have also demonstrated why food inflation is increasing in India. I have also talked about the World Bank study on MGNREGA and concluded that MGNREGA is actually the reason for food inflation in India. So now you write next set. In that two more will be there. One is core inflation. So just write one line under that. It is based on prices of only those commodities whose prices are non-volatile. It is based on prices of only those commodities whose prices are non-volatile. That means that is, it does not take into account the prices of food items. I've told you why it is so much volatile. Food items are inelastic from demand side and supply side. So I've told you why it is volatile. Even in small variation in the production can lead to volatility in prices. In case of bumper production, the prices will come down drastically. In case of very low production, the prices will go up drastically. All this can happen over a sudden period of time. So food item you will exclude in core inflation because this is very much volatile. Then fuel you will exclude, fertilizers, or write it together, fuel and fertilizers. Fuel and fertilizers. Okay, so generally food and fuel, this two is what we say. So core inflation means excluding food and fuel. when you say generally. So that is not, as its name indicate, this is not volatile. These two are volatile, so you exclude that. So this is basically to know the trend of inflation. Okay, basically used to know the trend of inflation. Second one under this category, you can write headline inflation. Headline inflation. It is based on prices of all types or group of commodities. It is based on prices of all types of commodities, all types or groups of commodities. So this is what actually used. This is used usually. Core inflation is basically used to know the trend only. Okay, so normally used as headline inflation. Now there are some more related terms which is related to the rates of inflation. So you can write based on rate. Based on rate. There are different other terms, like first one, creeping inflation. Creeping inflation. So here the inflation is like low up to 3%. Low, or just write low. And this 3%, it depends on different countries. Okay, so better to say low inflation, because this what is low is actually very subjective. In India, what is the ideal rate? Before also I have told you 4% is ideal rate. Plus or minus 2 you can go. That means 6 to or 2 to 6 is actually the range. So it can go up to 6 also. This is also considered as ideal as per Urjit Patel committee. We have already discussed this before. So the committee report in detail I will discuss after this session. So up to 3% generally you can say, but it is better to say low. Okay, because this 3% when we are saying this is very low in India, but developed countries, this is 3 itself is actually very high. They target like 2, 1%, etc. Okay. So UK, if you see, they are targeting 2%, because for them supply is elastic in case of developed countries, because they have better infrastructure, whatever it is. Even in case of food items also, supply is elastic. In India it is inelastic. In India these are perishable items, we don't have the cold storage infrastructure, but when it comes to developed countries, they have all the facilities. So supply side it is elastic. For India it is inelastic. So that's why they are targeting very low inflation. So when we talk about low, what I'm saying is you don't want to write a particular percentage. It can be subjective and it varies and change with the countries. Now second one, you can write walking inflation. Walking or trotting. Trotting means what? Horse walk, no? Horse walk. That's what trot. Trotting inflation. You can write there moderate or moderately high, like 3 to 7%. Moderate or moderately high inflation. Next, third one, running inflation. Running inflation. So this is high inflation. High inflation. So up to 7 to 10, that range. Okay. Now next one, you can write galloping inflation. Galloping inflation. So this is a very high inflation. Very high inflation. Now I don't want to change the percentage range, same I am keeping. So it again depends on different countries. So for some countries 7 to 10 will come under high running inflation. Some countries this will become galloping inflation. So I am keeping the same percentage here. Okay. So here better to say high and very high. Now one more is there, runaway inflation. Runaway or hyperinflation. Hyperinflation. Like what happened in case of Zimbabwe, Argentina, and before in Germany, etc. Right? So the prices are going so high. Even if you need to buy a piece of bread, you need to go with a suitcase full of currency. and the suitcase will cost more than the currency that you hold in that. So that is a situation of hyperinflation. It is never desirable, so you can write extremely high. Extremely high inflation. So here, if this happens, it is actually an indication that monetary system collapse. So it will lead to, the monetary system will collapse. Monetary system collapse. And people will lose trust on the money. Okay, so value of money will come down very drastically. What is the main cause of hyperinflation? The main cause is actually excessive printing of money. Okay? So when this system like hyperinflation come, it is actually caused due to excessive printing of money. So when the system collapse, now people trust will go. So now you need to introduce maybe a new currency. You have to withdraw all the currency. You need to go for demonetization, and you have to withdraw entire currency. You need to introduce new currency, and there should be a backup for the currency. Like we have discussed different types of money, right? So representative full-bodied money, etc. Now, which one we are following? We are keeping only 200 crore requirement, and we are printing unlimited amount of currency. So like token money, right? But here it has to be representative full-bodied money now. Okay, so like you have to keep the equivalent amount of gold, and you have to print money. Then only people will have the trust. So entire monetary system will collapse here, like what happened in case of Zimbabwe, Argentina, etc. Now give a heading Urjit Patel Committee. Very important. Even though the committee was in 2014, the recommendations, almost all the recommendations are implemented and is still in, important. Okay, still is considered as important. So Urjit Patel Committee. So you can write the name of the committee: Committee to Review and Strengthen the Monetary Policy Framework. Committee to Review and Strengthen the Monetary Policy Framework. Committee to Review and Strengthen the Monetary Policy Framework. So Dr. Urjit Patel was the chairman of this committee. So report was in Jan 2014. A lot of changes were made. We will discuss the recommendations one by one. So you can write the recommendations. Under that, the first one, RBI should use, first one, RBI should use CPI instead WPI. We have discussed already this point. When we discuss about WPI, I have told you till 2014, till Urjit Patel committee, it was WPI which was used, but now after that it was shifted to CPI, because WPI gives an impact of inflation on the economy, but when it comes to CPI, that gives the impact of inflation on the public, okay, from the consumer side, from the retailer side. So WPI instead, what we're saying, the RBI should use CPI instead of WPI based inflation as a nominal anchor for monetary policy formulation. As a nominal anchor for monetary policy formulation. Even WPI, not only the one which we have discussed, I have told you already, WPI is missing services also, right? So when we talk about GDP, it is goods and services. So everything is having a role to play. A lot of services has to be taken care with respect to our life. So in case of CPI, it includes services also. CPI shows impact on people. WPI shows impact on economy. WPI is missing economy because there is no wholesale. WPI is missing services. I have told you there is no wholesale market for services. It is directly sold and consumed. And I have also told you this is an international best practice, CPI. So most countries are following CPI. So these are the valid arguments in support of this the change. So CPI instead of WPI. So those three are the valid points, or you can support this change. Next one. Next point.
Sir, I have a question here.
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, actually I read yesterday that a new committee has been formed in the last of 2019, I guess. So they are considering to change it back to PPI. So what will be the arguments in support of that?
So is that accepted, that committee recommendation? I don't know.
No, sir. No, sir.
So let's wait for the committee
The
recommendation.
recommendation has not been filed yet.
Yeah, let's wait for the recommendation and we will talk that.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So RBI should endeavor to reduce. Next point. RBI should endeavor to reduce CPI based inflation. RBI should endeavor to reduce CPI based inflation from the current level of 10% to 8% within a year, and further to 6% within 2 years. Now it is not relevant, even we are going less than that only. So CPI based inflation from current level of 10% to 8% within a year, and further to 6% within 2 years. That means this recommendation was in 2014, that was by 2016 it has to be 6%. That is not relevant at this point of time, but I am just giving you the recommendation. Next, thereafter, this point is important, continuation. Thereafter, inflation should be maintained at 4%. Inflation should be maintained at 4% with a band of 4% with a band of plus or minus 2 percentage point. Plus or minus 2 percent points. I've told you the difference between percentage point and percentage. Okay, see, when I'm talking about if this is percentage, then what would have been the, okay, tell me, what is that band now? This is 4%. So when I'm saying plus or minus 2 percentage point, it is 2 to 6, this band. Okay? Is that okay? But instead of saying percentage point, if I'm saying percentage, if it is 2%, then the entire situation is different. You need to find what is 2% of 4. What is 2% of 4? That is 0.8. Okay? So what you need to do, add 0.08 and subtract 0.08. So it will be 3.92 to 4.08 should be the range. You understood the difference between percentage and percentage point? But when I'm saying percentage point means 1 percentage point is actually 100 basis point. So I can directly add 1 to 4, and similarly here I can add 2 to 4 directly when I'm saying this 2. But if I'm saying 2%, I have to find 2% of 4, that is 0.08, and then I need to add that, I need to subtract that. So I'm not talking about percentage. If it is percentage, this should be the band, and that is better to say 4% itself. Okay? Next you write the RBI or government should adopt flexible inflation targeting policy. RBI should adopt flexible inflation targeting policy. What do you mean by flexible inflation targeting? You can see, firstly it is inflation targeting. That means inflation targeting is more important. So that is what inflation targeting. But when we use the word flexible inflation targeting, keeping in mind the growth also. So the priority is obviously inflation targeting, but you have to keep in mind the growth also. Okay. So all these three, actually what we have discussed is accepted. Now next you can write, the government should reduce fiscal deficit. The government should reduce fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP to provide reasonable degree of flexibility to the monetary policy. to provide reasonable degree of flexibility to the monetary policy. Can anyone explain what is this? Why this is? Government should reduce fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP to provide reasonable degree of flexibility to the monetary policy.
Because, sir, due to if one side monetary policy is done to control the inflation, and by increasing the fiscal deficit, or we can say by increasing the government expenditure, this is nullified.
Yes.
They are saying keep it control up to 3, so that the effect of monetary policy can be observed on the market.
Yes. So exactly the same. So when the monetary policy is planned by the RBI, the fiscal policy also should be in sync with that. Otherwise, on RBI will go to one extreme and fiscal expenditure is increasing. There is of no use. So RBI will keep on increasing the interest rates, and that will effectively affect the growth only. It will not be able to control inflation as the expenditure of government is increasing. So government will also have to reduce the expenditure. Government also have to cooperate. So both should go hand in hand. So both should be contractionary policy. Next point you write. Monetary policy should be reviewed at bi-monthly interval. Monetary policy should be reviewed at bi-monthly interval instead of quarterly reviews. So now after every month it is there, so it is accepted. Okay, so next point, RBI should introduce a spectrum of term repos. I'll explain this. Spectrum of term repos. So repo, already we have discussed, and I've told you it is for short-term borrowing by pledging the GSEC, government security. Banks can borrow short-term, normally 14 days we have discussed. So here term repo, that is repos of relatively larger periods to be introduced. So initially it was like 2 weeks only. So now it is also accepted. Now 8-week repos there. Okay, that means 56 days is there. Earlier 2 weeks, that means 14 days. Now 8-week repos there. So what about the interest? Interest will be more where? Here or there? Or both will be same? Interest rate will be same for both?
So I think in short term the interest will be more.
See, in short term interest is less, long term interest is actually more. You are getting more flexibility. Whenever you are getting more flexibility, you have to pay more. Okay, so here it will be more. So the interest is actually different. But which one will serve as the policy rate? I have told you repo will serve as the policy rate. So now you have 14 days repo and you have 56 days repo. Which one will serve as the policy rate? This will serve as the policy rate. Okay, 14-day repo will serve as the policy rate. Next point you write, the real policy rate should remain positive. The real policy rate should remain positive. The real policy rate should remain positive. What does that mean? Real interest rate we have discussed already. So real policy rate means what? When you are fixing the repo is the policy rate. When you are fixing the repo, it should be greater than inflation. Right? It should be greater than, let's suppose 5% inflation is there. And if your repo is 4%, so effectively real policy rate is negative here, right? Because you need to subtract inflation. So you need to keep at least 6% as repo. So 6 minus 5, you are getting plus 1. So here real policy rate is positive. Okay, so this is by and large accepted, but the problem is actually with the government. So if more inflation is there, let's suppose 10% is the inflation. Now imagine this situation, if this condition has to be satisfied, RBI have to keep 11% as repo. And every other interest will be connected to repo. So it's going to be so difficult situation. Interest will go so high and growth will come down and all this will be a big problem. So by and large it is accepted. Okay, next point to write. Monetary policy should be formulated by a 5-member monetary policy committee. A 5-member monetary policy committee headed by RBI governor. Okay, now next we will talk about this monetary policy committee and monetary policy framework agreement between government and RBI. So,
excuse me, sir.
Yeah, tell me.
Please repeat the 5th point in the Urjit Patel committee recommendations. 5th point.
So, what is that point? Tell me. I missed it.
After reduced fiscal deficit.
Reduce fiscal deficit to a reasonable. You only answered that particular question, no? You only answered that question to me when I have asked. So why reduce it to 3%? Why? Already there is a FRBMA that says reduce it to 3%. Apart from that, Urjit Patel also stressing on this, so that there is no deficit financing or there is no borrowing. So that will further lead to inflation.
I'm asking about the point after this point.
Okay. Yeah. Monetary policy should be reviewed at bi-monthly intervals instead of quarterly reviews. Like, bi-monthly intervals.
Okay,
Somebody was asking this last day. Who was asking? Ashwin, I think. Somebody was asking this. Okay. Any doubts?
Sir, I am a little bit confused with this suppressed or repressed inflation and inflation control measures. Can you just come back on that point?
Inflation control measures we have already discussed before. So in that context, I have told you RBI as well as government will take certain measures. So, and we have understood this as contractionary policy.
Yes, sir.
Contractionary policy. But this is not directly fixing the price. Contractionary policy, in that there are monetary policy and there are fiscal policy. You know what are the monetary policy tools that is available with RBI? Repo,
yes,
reverse repo, and CRR, SLR, bank rate, MSF. These are the policy tools. And the government, it is related to the taxes, right? So government also have some fiscal expenditure, all these. So this is indirectly affecting the inflation. That's what inflation control. But when I've talked about suppressed inflation, government directly fixes a ceiling price. That this particular item should not go, onion, let's say it should not go beyond 80 rupee. So that price is fixed by the government. So even if the demand is so high, the price won't go beyond 80 rupee.
Got it, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a direct measure which is taken by government. These are control means indirect measure. What are you doing here? Here you are actually either increasing the supply or you are decreasing the demand.
Understood. Yes, got it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? So we take a break from in Saturday and Sunday. So we'll continue from Monday.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, we will continue from Monday. Bye. See you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.